What is up, guys? Today's video is part 2 of my multi-part series on photography and classism. In this video series, I am using this iceberg to guide sort of a discussion and analysis of different ways that classism intersects with photography. If you missed last week's video, do go and check it out. It looks like this, and I will put a link to it down in the description below. So go and watch that before you watch this. Last week, we went over some key ideological concepts that are important for understanding this series, and we also went through tiers 1 and 2 of this iceberg. In this video, I'm gonna go through tiers 3 and 4. And a quick disclaimer, I changed some things on the iceberg. I moved a bunch of things from tier 5 into tier 4, and then I got rid of a few entries altogether. It was too big, and I didn't want to cover it all, but also I feel like the entries that remain on the iceberg are enough to make the points that I want to make. I want to get into it soon, but I have written another kind of ideological intro to some of the key topics that we're going to cover in tiers 3 and 4. Specifically, time, which I alluded to with a very heavy hand in my last video. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's talk about time. So, a while ago, there was this pretty infamous meme quote thing making the rounds in the millionaire mindset girl bossosphere, and it was basically, you have the same 24 hours in the day as Beyonce. The implication being that if she can do all of the amazing things that she does in a day, so can you. Now, I hope we've all seen some kind of clever retort made to this quote, like a Twitter call-out meme reply or something like that. I feel honestly like I've seen more replies to this quote than I have seen copies of the original at this point, but even though replying to this meme with adages about time being a class privilege is kind of low-hanging fruit at this point, I figured it would be a great place to start this video, since so many of the iceberg entries we'll be covering today refer to time. Beyonce has a team. If you have a team of 24 people and each of them does an hour of work for you a day, you actually have 48 hours in a day instead of 24 to dedicate to improving your station. If each of your 24 employees works regular part-time hours, you have closer to 100 hours a day dedicated to you. And you can do a lot more with 100 hours in a day than you can with 24. I fantasize about what my photography team would be like. I'd have a video editor for sure, a social media manager, a photo retoucher, probably a second shooter to send out to gigs that I'm not creatively inspired by, a marketing manager, maybe a PR person, and absolutely I would have an accountant. I'd show up to a gig and shoot it, and then I'd pop the memory card out and hand it to someone else on the way out the door. And then of course I would tell all of you layabouts that the only reason why you're not as successful as me is because you just don't work as hard. Even without a team, Beyonce does not work a 9-to-5 job. If you do, then you actually have 16 hours in a day. And if you commute to that 9-to-5 job, let's say an hour each way, which I think is pretty typical, then you actually have 14 hours. And you're asleep for 7 of them. So then you have 7 left, which 7 hours a day is a whole other job, basically. You could work really hard in your off hours, and there's nothing that should be able to stop you. Yeah, that sounds great. There's a lot of people who work 80-hour weeks, and they all seem totally fine, don't they? But it's not as easy as that, because these reductionist breakdowns of how successful people spend their time never seem to include the entire rest of your life. As if living a life that consists entirely of work, commute, and sleep is really the recipe to success. You gotta eat, which takes time, and you also gotta acquire food, which takes time. If you're rich, then you can just eat out all the time, but if you're normal, then you have to cook. That also takes time. And you have to get groceries to cook, which takes time. You gotta work out, or you should, if you don't want your body to crumble to pieces in middle age, and that takes time too, but as far as a return on your investment goes, it's probably honestly a better use of your time than trying to build a photography business. So do that, and then you also gotta see your friends and family at least occasionally, because otherwise you'll wind up cold and alone on your deathbed clutching a Leica, so that takes time. And then if you're like an autonomous adult, you also have to keep up with housework, which is doing laundry and keeping things tidy and caring for pets and plants and sweeping and doing the dishes. All of that takes time. And if you have kids, well then you're out of time already. So it all takes time, right? And if you have class privilege, you're economically well endowed and you can just hire team members to help give you back some of that time, that's great. But if not, you just have to spend that time like everybody else. So you do all of this, you have some good days and some bad days, you balance everything the best that you can, and you squeeze photography stuff in wherever possible. An hour here, 2 hours there, and that is going to be slow. The progress will be slow, the improvement will be slow, the rate at which you descend this iceberg will be slower if you do not have time, money, and energy in abundance. And that's just how it is. That's how it's gotta be. It's not the mad dash to the finish line that photography podcast hosts like to make it out to be. It can't be, because we live in a hyper-capitalist hellscape that perpetuates itself by squeezing so much out of the working class that we lack the resources, time, and energy to overthrow it. Unless you do have time. And not just time, but leisure time. Time in which you don't have to be doing anything else. Time that you can spend doing work and not getting paid for it. Because most of the things that you're going to spend time on in your first year of photography are not going to get you paid. They're not going to make you any money. Like, none at all. Some people do have spare time, but would benefit enormously from using it to actually make money, like driving DoorDash or taking on small gig work, or even investing that time into learning a more lucrative skill. When I first started photography, I kind of thought that's what I was doing. I thought I was buying my camera as an investment to help me make some money on the side while I got through college. I don't want to discourage anyone from trying to make a career as a photographer. I love photography, and I love my career as a photographer, and I love to see other people loving it too, right? I think that there are a lot of content creators on this website who feel the same, and I think that a lot of the inspirational photography content that we see comes from a really good place, right? It's coming from people wanting to see people discover this art form and express themselves creatively through it. There's joy in introducing people to something you love and having them fall in love with it too. It's probably one of the best feelings that you can have. Bringing a new love, a new joy into someone's life. Oh my God. And that's why I think many of us being photography-related content creators on YouTube, shy away from talking about these classist barriers. Because we want to make it seem easy to get into photography so that more people try it, right? More people discover this beautiful art form and find passion through it. I feel kind of bad making this video, to be honest, because I don't have any great solutions other than be rich, get rich, or work nonstop all the time with absolutely no balance in your life. Or ideally, honestly, probably all three would be your best bet. But unfortunately, I am making this video because I believe that you don't have to have a solution to a problem to make it worth talking about. So here we are, once again, at the Iceberg. Shooting for free to build a portfolio. Oh my God, this is probably honestly the most important thing in this tier, maybe the most important thing on the whole iceberg. Every professional photographer will tell you this: you need to shoot for free. And not just sometimes, constantly. All the time. Every photography origin story starts with shooting for free and building a portfolio. Every photographer on YouTube who's got some 2-hour interview on how they got into photography started by shooting for free. If it's product photography, you go out and buy products, props, and lights, shoot them together, and then maybe return the products after if you can't actually afford them. If it's people, you find models on Facebook or Instagram and set up as many shoots as possible. If you want to shoot fashion, you go out and buy some outfits from a thrift store, find a model, style it yourself. If you're wanting to shoot interiors, maybe you go to some open houses and sneak some shots, or you take photos of every hotel room you've ever stayed in, or you rent an Airbnb to get photos of that. You might notice that some of these involve spending money, so you're not just shooting for free, you're actively paying money to shoot. But you shouldn't be any stranger to that, because if you've gotten to tier 3, you already spent $2,000 to $6,000 on tiers 1 and 2. So what's $150 more for some props and costumes? I still shoot a lot for free. I run a full-time business as a professional photographer, and still probably 20% of my photo shoots are unpaid. Why do I do this? Well, it's mostly creative stuff, ideas I want to try out, techniques I want to try out, stuff for my own portfolio, but also trying new lighting setups and posing ideas and test running new equipment, anything that I wouldn't want to fumble around with while a client is in front of me, right? And even when I shoot for free, I am actively paying for it because I'm paying for the studio time, which we will get to. But basically, you should shoot for free as much and as often as your schedule will allow. It's tiring, it's draining, and it is an absolutely mandatory part of the work. Unfortunately, I think a lot of classist barriers in other fields boil down to this too. Your capacity to work for free sort of determines how many people you're able to meet and how large your network is, how many people have seen you working, and how many people have seen the end result. When I say it kind of boils down to this, there's a lot more that it boils down to, but this is the very surface level argument that I'm making in this part of this video. Before I was a photographer, I was in politics. Can you tell? And the only reason why I was able to succeed as much as I did in politics was because I spent every spare moment throughout college volunteering for campaigns and causes. By the time I graduated, everyone in the local activist community knew me, and sure enough, I did get a good union job pretty much right out of college, not because of my degree, but because I had learned administrative skills through my volunteer work and also made necessary social connections through various campaigns that I had been a part of. That good union job allowed me to pay my way through the first 2 tiers of this iceberg, and it all boils down, in the end, to my capacity to work for free. And that capacity isn't a matter of work ethic. it's class privilege. Moving on, constant networking. Everyone you meet should find out pretty quickly that you're a photographer, and you should do certain activities to increase the number of people you meet. That includes going to networking events as often as possible. Events for musicians, for actors, for film and TV people, fellow artists, small businesses, and especially influencers, anyone who is going to be at least peripherally related to your chosen field of photography. You have to spend at least a bit of your time this way if you want to find clients and expand your network, and you're also going to be spending a bit of your money and social energy too. And you're not just networking in person either, you're networking online, which brings me to time spent on social media. If you follow me on social media, you know that this is a big line item for me. I spend about 8 hours each week on my YouTube videos, and up until last week, nothing on my channel was monetized. I also spend about half an hour a day making reels and posting to Instagram. I schedule my Facebook posts in advance, which takes about an hour a week, and I reply to DMs on Facebook and Instagram, which is definitely like at least an hour a day. I don't do TikTok or Twitter because Jesus Christ, but some people do. It's a lot of work. And it's pretty tricky too to measure how much it matters without directly asking new clients, so how did you hear about me? I am a full-time photographer, and keeping up with my social media is equivalent to a part-time job. And of course, other freelancers will have different ideas about how much of your time you should spend working on social media. I am definitely on like the higher end of time spent, and there are a few things that we'll talk about in part 3 that will kind of allow you to bypass this social media work, which put a pin in that. But from my position, as I stand right now, I would absolutely advise any new photographer to spend at least a few hours every week working on their social media. So, even though many professional photographers have different opinions on the necessity of Instagram, one thing that we all pretty much agree on is that you do need lights. And what do you know? Lights are expensive. Yeah, we're back to talking about how much things cost. A decent lighting kit will run you about $300 per head, and I would advise having 3 heads at least, but you can definitely get by with 2. Here's what my work looked like when I only had 2 lights, and here's what it looks like now that I have 3. This difference in quality will matter more to you depending on where you are in your photographic journey. But either way, shooting with natural light will only get you so far. Natural light being entirely sunlight. If you want to get commercial clients, if you want your photos to be crisp and polished and bright and bold, you need to buy lights and you need to learn how to use them, which takes time and a good chunk of money. You can get this 3-head lighting kit for around $2,000, but they all have cords, so you can shoot with these in studio and they're great for studio work, but as soon as you're out on location, you're gonna need some kind of cordless alternative. So there's these, which are like the gold standard for affordable portable lighting. Honestly, just go straight to these. Don't mess around with speed lights and pocket wizards and stuff. I know a ton of photographers who have at least one of these, and they cost around $300 each, but you do need a transmitter to make it work, which is about $90 also. That's not all though. You also need light modifiers. Sometimes lighting kits will come with light modifiers, but they're always kind of small, and you can use them for a while, but eventually you do need a bigger one to achieve certain looks. So you go and buy a big octobox or a big umbrella for maybe $200, and then you buy a strip box for another $200, or a beauty dish for $60, or a curved reflector for $120. And then you have to store all of this stuff too somewhere, right? Like, you can't just have all of this lighting equipment lying around. Put a pin in that because we're gonna talk about that in Tier 4, but first, let's wrap up Tier 3 and talk about our final installment here. Websites are expensive, and you kinda have to have a website. I know that it seems outdated, and I thought that I could get by without a website for quite a while, but honestly, it's the best way to curate and display your work and present it to potential clients. It's also a great way to capture some SEO traffic so you don't have to rely as much on your social media presence. So how much is a website? I don't know, my mom made mine. But I do pay $240 per year for the website hosting. Tack that on to your $300 per year Photoshop subscription. If you hire someone to make your website, it's going to be a pretty big financial investment, around $1,200 I think for a good one. But if you want to do it yourself, then it's going to be a pretty big time investment instead. Not to mention the time that it takes to curate your portfolio, which will also inflict psychic damage as you slowly realize that you've never taken a good photo in your life. Finally, we are reaching Tier 4. And here we have the word access appearing for the first time. This is a good word to keep in mind for the rest of the iceberg. Not for Tier 4. There's nothing new really to cover in Tier 4 besides more things that cost money and time, so I am going to do my best to blast through it. But access will be a pretty key term in part 3 of this video series coming out next week. Tier 4, access to space for shooting. Studio space costs a lot of money. It could be anywhere from $50 to $175 per hour. That's kind of in the average range. I think 50 would even be low. Maybe you don't have a studio. Maybe you don't have access to one or you can't afford one, and maybe you shoot out of your house instead. Well, this probably means that your house is big enough to at least partially accommodate a studio space. There was this one photographer who I followed on Instagram, and I really loved his work. I thought he was an incredibly talented and creative photographer, but all of his reels were basically talking about how great and creative he was for making such beautiful photos out of his garage, as if he was making something out of nothing, right? It was like, oh, all I have to work with is this garage, and look at these beautiful photos that I've made. Like, whoa, you have a big empty space available to you that is literally attached to your house and you use it? So inspiring. I had to stop following him. It was making me mad. Having space is a class privilege. It just is, right? If you're living in a studio apartment, you don't have space to run a photography business out of your house. Before I had a studio, I pretty much exclusively shot outside, which not only limited my ability to make the kinds of photos that I wanted to make, but also exposed me to all kinds of interruptions and harassment. Oh my God, was that an annoying period of time. You know what else you can do with a garage? You can store your stuff. So you have lights, you have stands, you have light modifiers, you have background papers, you have cords, you have reflectors, you have props and costumes and stage dressing, lenses and carrying cases. You've got a mountain of gear that all has various levels of durability, ranging from incredibly durable light stands to fragile little lenses. And you have to put it all somewhere, or it's just gonna pile up. Moving on, I wanna blast through tier 4. The next item is time spent putting together shoots. Shopping for props and costumes takes time, making set pieces takes time, mood boards take time, organizing 10 people so they're all in a room when they're supposed to be takes time. It all takes time, and the higher production value your photo shoots have, the more time it takes to set them up. As you grow in your art, so will the amount of time it takes to get each photo. Next is time spent retouching and editing. It does take a long time. It takes a long time to learn, and then it also takes a long time to do. Probably 30% of the time I spend working, I'm sorting and editing photos. 2 to 3 hours a day, and oftentimes much more than that. I don't even retouch all that much. Like, I'll retouch people's faces, and sometimes the backgrounds, and definitely splotches on the floor, but I'm not like a 3 hours per photo kind of person. Some people are. And once again, as you grow in your art, so will the amount of time it takes to edit each photo. So finally, we have reached the end of tier 4, and our last entry is this. Printing work is expensive. Now, I'm actually including this one here as a bit of an Easter egg for next week's video, because next week, when we get into our discussion of access and what that means, I'm gonna talk about this interview with Tyler Shields, and it is just wild. Like, I've watched this interview a few times, and every time there's another little nugget. He talks a lot about printmaking and how much it helped him in his early years as a photographer, and how printmaking will make you a better photographer. But don't worry, he says. He didn't start out making 100-inch prints that cost thousands of dollars. No, he started out by making 5x7 prints that only cost a measly $75. This is in the section of the interview that's called Being Attainable, where he outright denies having class privilege because he lived on a couch for a while so that he could spend all of his money on printmaking. Being able to spend all of your money on printmaking and not saving it for an emergency or spending it on household bills or sending it to your family is a pretty privileged position to be in. I have gripes with a lot of these starving artist rags to riches stories because so many of them have plot holes. And if you want plot holes, go and watch this interview before my next video and see if you can predict what I'm gonna say about it, because oh my God, there are a few of them. Anyways, printing work is expensive, but don't worry. Tyler Shields says it's only unattainable if you decide it is. So if you can't afford it, just decide you can. So that wraps up tiers 3 and 4. I took some stuff out of the original. Thank you guys for bearing with me for that. Changing the iceberg, I do what I want. But it's already pretty long, and I think you get the picture. All of the key concepts here are kind of flushed out. So I'm really looking forward to talking about access and what that means in next week's video. Thank you guys so much for watching this one. If you enjoyed this video, you can leave a comment down below letting me know what you think. Next week, I'm going to talk about access and what it means to have access. I'll also talk about how access enables some people to skip a bunch of the tiers on this iceberg. I'm also going to talk about education and nepotism and some other fun concepts in that constellation as well. I'll see you guys back here next week for part 3, and in the meantime, I want you guys to stay sharp and don't forget to keep shooting. Bye guys.